Relations Association back to Northern California today. And hearing the discussion before we, as people were joining the call earlier, a lot of you do have some kind of historical information about LERA and its mission, but for those who are a little bit newer to the organization and kind of its foundation and its mission, let me tell you, we are a newly merged organization in the Northern California area, and we include the San Francisco and Bay Area, entire Sacramento region. And the objective of the Northern California LERA is to foster better relationships and understanding amongst labor and employment professionals, and to provide a forum for open discussion and emerging trends and legal developments. And we encourage everyone to do this. We want people from all sides, neutrals, management, government, academia, and neutrals. And so that is the purpose of today's event. That is why we are here. I think it's going to be an exciting and robust conversation and dialogue, and I encourage everyone to participate. If you have a question, shoot it through the chat. We'll be more than happy to kind of address questions as we move forward, but certainly that is the objective. And so we do want to have a robust conversation, and everyone feel free to participate and comment, and we will certainly try to address those in the chat and incorporate them into the presentation as we move forward. Without further ado, I do want to introduce our wonderful board members who have made today possible. First, I'd like to recognize our chapter president, June Payoyo. June is a conciliator and mediator with the State Mediation and Conciliation Service. I'd like to give a very special thank you to June for his invaluable contributions to make this event possible today. Unfortunately, we regret to inform you that June was unable to attend the inaugural event today, but we are forever grateful for everything that he has done to make today possible. So thank you very much, June. In addition to that, we currently do not have a vice president. So I want to take this opportunity to encourage anyone who's interested in serving as vice president on our board. If you know anyone who might be interested, if you're interested yourself, please let us know. We are looking to fill the position with a labor or union representative. So again, if that might be you or someone you know or someone who you think might be good for the job and is interested, certainly please do have them reach out to any of the board members, and we'll be happy to discuss that with them. And next, I would like to introduce Renee Mayne. I believe she welcomed each and everyone as we arrived at this meeting. Renee is our chapter secretary, and she is an arbitrator, mediator, and adjunct faculty member. Renee has really spearheaded efforts to reestablish this chapter, and I'm sure I speak for everyone on our entire board when we extend our sincerest gratitude and thanks to Renee for all she has done, because we too would not be here, and this event probably would not have happened had Renee not done all that she's done to get us here. So thank you, Renee, on behalf of myself and the entire board for everything that you've done. Let's see, and then moving on to the secretary. So I am also the secretary, and just to give you a little bit of information about my practice, in addition to being a secretary for the board, I do practice labor and employment defense here in Sacramento County, primarily wage and hour, class action, representative actions, in addition to single plaintiff, harassment and discrimination defense, and EEO related claims. So I'm very excited to be involved in this forum, because I feel like it allows me to reach across the board and have communications and dialogue with individuals and perspectives that I otherwise might not encounter. So I am very excited for today's event. And in addition, I'd like to introduce the rest of our board members. We have Sam Kim. He is an IT leader for Santa Clara County. I don't believe he's here at the moment. And then in addition to that, we have Felix de la Torre. He is the general counsel for the Public Employment Relations Board. And we have Vanessa De Leon. She's a labor relation officer with Sacramento County. And we also have Jim Pruitt. He is the Vice President of Labor Relations for Kaiser Permanente. So thank you to our entire board for all that you have done, the behind the scenes work, the many, many meetings that we've had. I know it's been a lot of work, but we are here, and I am very, very excited. And in addition to the Vice President position that I discussed earlier as being open and vacant. We also have 2 more board positions. So if you're perhaps not interested in serving as vice president and you'd be willing to take on maybe a smaller role, certainly reach out to us. We have 2 additional positions for board members. So I think that is kind of just a snapshot of everything and how we've gotten here. In addition to that, since we are a newly merged organization and we are looking to grow and establish a larger footprint in the Northern California region, one of our primary objectives and goals is going to be recruitment. So I encourage everyone who is here today to go to our website, consider becoming a member. It's only $35 for an entire annual membership. In addition to that, if you're part of an organization who might be interested in signing up for you know, a group of individuals, we also have group membership for $100, and you can do that for up to 5 people. So I encourage everyone, go to our website, register. If you care about, you know, our goal, our mission, what we want to do, what we're trying to do, please, by all means, join us and contribute in any way that you can. And so I know we sent out the agendas. I'll just touch briefly on the speakers today. We're going to have 3 keynote speakers. First, we'll have Professor Harry Katz. And then we will have Dennis Dabney. He's the Senior Vice President, National Labor Relations and Office of Labor Management Partnership at Kaiser Permanente. And then we will have our National Labor and Employment Relations Association Executive Director, Emily Smith, take the floor. And in addition to that, we are very, very excited to have the California Assemblywoman, Lorena Gonzalez, join us today to discuss AB 5. I think from all facets of everything labor and employment, this is such a really huge topic in all circles right now, because it really does affect labor and employment at its very, very core. And so we are so happy to have her with us today to discuss AB 5 and how it's affected California employers and employees. And without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Vanessa De Leon for our first speaker introduction. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, so Professor Harry Katz is the Jack Shinkman Professor of Collective Bargaining at the School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University, as well as the director of the Steinman Institute on Conflict Resolution at the Industrial and Labor Relations School at Cornell. Professor Katz is also the president-elect of International Labor and Employment Relations Association. He received his PhD in economics from the University of California at Berkeley. After teaching at MIT, he joined the New York State School of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell University in 1985. His research focuses on new structures for labor management relationships in the United States, as his work argues the need for a more cooperative system. He's an expert on labor relations in the automobile and telecommunications industry in both the US and abroad, and is often invited to lecture about those industries and about current labor management relationships in general. Professor Katz is the author of several books, including Shifting Gears, Changing Labor Relations in the US Automobile Industry, The Transformation of American Industrial Relations, Converging Divergences, Worldwide Changes in Employment Systems, and the widely used textbook, An Introduction to Collective Bargaining and Industrial Relations. Professor Katz will discuss his view on labor relations and the status quo in the US. Please welcome.
Great. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to talk with this group. Let me mention a personal set of reasons why I'm especially delighted to see a chapter being formed in the Bay Area, then go on and mention a little bit about how it delights me in my role as a past president of LERA, and then I'll get into my substantive remarks. And in my substantive remarks, I'm going to talk a bit about the labor issues that are surfacing during the pandemic. So on the personal side, it was mentioned that I got my PhD at Berkeley. In addition, I grew up in the Bay Area. Although I was born in New York City, we moved to the Bay Area when I was 5 years old. My father was in the wine industry, and I grew up in Saratoga on the edge of San Jose. And I was also an undergraduate at Berkeley and then stayed on to get my PhD. Then I headed back east to start teaching at MIT, but my parents and my brother and sister and their families stayed in California, and I've had great occasions which I continue now to visit them whenever I can and revisit a lot of my childhood friends and some of my college friends. As a president of LERA, I think I was president starting 4 years ago, right before Dennis. Dennis is the one who followed me as president of LERA. LERA then was taking some steps trying to enhance the interaction between the national chapter, which had always had somewhat of a more academic focus, although it included, a number of practitioners. But also there were these local chapters, 50 to 55 of them. Emily and Bernadette helped me understand. And there was kind of a distance felt between the national and local chapters. And we took steps supported by votes of our membership to try and have a greater connection between the activities of the national LERA and the local chapters. And I won't go into all the details of those steps, but for me, then as a president of LERA, part of my role was to go visit as many of the local chapters as I could, and with the help of Bernadette and Emily, I visited somewhere along the lines of 10 different chapters all over the United States. And I really wanted to visit a Bay Area chapter. I had heard that there had been a chapter. I knew some people that had been involved. I had students at the ILR school who had gone off to work in HR and labor relations in the Bay Area. And then I got in touch with Dennis and Jim, and we talked a lot about how wouldn't it be nice if the Northern California chapter was reborn. And I'm really pleased that those efforts have come to fruition. And I thank all of those who have worked so hard, Janine and others, in getting this meeting going. Okay. So what I'd like to talk about is the issue that we sort of hear all about in the press at times, and I've been trying to take a bit closer look at it, and that is the labor issues that have been surfacing as a consequence of the pandemic. As was mentioned, I have a textbook that I wrote with Tom Koken and Alex Colvin about labor relations in the United States. And Tom and I and Alex decided that we would write an update chapter in light of what's happening in the pandemic. And so I've taken the lead on that, and with the help of one of my PhD students, Matt Fisher-Daly, we've now written a long compendium account of all the different labor issues that are surfacing with references to news stories and other analyses. And we're using it. I'm using it in my teaching. I'm teaching a large undergraduate labor relations class this semester via Zoom with 140 students at Cornell. I teach a master's set of students, and we also have others who use our textbook. So what I'm going to talk about is sort of draws from that chapter. If any of you want the whole chapter, feel free to send me an email message, and I'd be happy to send you that chapter. We have been circulating it to everyone who uses our textbook. We have an instructor's manual, so that keeps us in touch with people using our textbook and all. There's lots of things that are labor related in the pandemic. One of them, which I won't go through, of course, is the consequences in the labor market of the initial freeze up starting in March in our economic activities, and then the ensuing economic downturn. Of course, we've all been hearing the latest news regarding the extent to which unemployment is rebounding. There's currently kind of a stall going on in that rebound. And of course, there's lots of data about the number of people, unprecedented going back as far as the Great Depression, and the number of people that are on unemployment insurance and all, and then great debates about, exactly what the trends are there. I don't want to focus so much on those, although that's really important, of course, for our economy, and especially for the people that have been hurt by the recession. I want to focus on, since I'm a labor relations person, and a number of you are involved in these matters, is kind of collective actions that have arisen in response to the issues generated by the pandemic. Protests, job actions, strikes, and the like. And there have been many, needless to say, some well reported in the press, others not receiving so much national coverage. But if you look closely and stay in touch with the parties, you learn about these kinds of actions. I think of them as sort of two categories of actions. Some of these are collective actions that are occurring where there isn't representation currently provided by a union. Let me remind you, of course, we've heard stories of some warehouse workers who are, like everyone else, worried about their personal safety. Many of the actions I'll talk about, whether they involve unions or don't involve unions, involve those, quote, essential employees who have had to continue to work while the pandemic was raging, and or were called back shortly thereafter when businesses started to reactivate during the summer months. So it's not so surprising the categories of people that I'll be talking about include warehouse workers, workers delivering groceries for Instacart and the like, people working in nursing homes who aren't represented by unions. There's been actions, housekeepers in hotels who were continuing to work on a very modest scale given the shutdown, but some of whom were called back when activity started to restart. Again, in unorganized settings, we've seen either a protest of one sort, attempts at negotiations with management, or at least dialogue. I'll come back to that later. Dealing with health and safety issues, a critical thing for us to keep in mind is these are the kind of issues that often get discussed through more informal channels because they affect people in their daily work lives. So in that sense, it's not surprising that even where there aren't unions, there have been efforts by employees to use collective action of one sort or another to try and influence their own personal safety, the equipment they're provided, the conditions they're under, whether they're going to receive extra hazard pay, as it's called, and the like. Now, I will also add that one of the things I and a number of us academics have been interested in is the trend in the United States towards more collective action, even before the pandemic, not necessarily involving health and safety issues. We've seen many organizations being formed, ranging from those that represent taxi drivers, a Taxi Driver Alliance, or Uber and Lyft drivers. There's efforts and collective action occurring there, efforts among farm workers, efforts among almost any category of worker you can think of. There are now many what we refer to as often rights groups or NGOs, non-government organizations, that are forming or assisting actions by employees to collectively express their concerns, again, in settings where there isn't formal union representation, is what I'm talking about. And as I spoke about actually in my farewell address as president of LERA, that I think is a really significant trend within labor relations in the United States, is to recognize that growth in activities and organizations trying to influence work conditions that operate outside of collective bargaining, with lots of interesting analytic questions. Will these evolve into collective bargaining? Do they substitute for collective bargaining? Are they going to be lasting? How do they get institutionalized? What kind of effect they will have? So just again to restate, I think the pandemic has spurred even further action by employees taking one form or another, even where there aren't unions, to try and influence their work conditions, with a particular emphasis, obviously, given the pandemic, on trying to influence the health and safety of their work environment and their own personal safety. And of course, there's also been, let me just remind you, although I would bet a number of you have many of your own personal experiences and would be able to add your own examples of this, there are many examples where there is union representation, and those unions over the last several months have become involved in the very health and safety issues I'm referring to, that have arisen and been made more severe because of the pandemic. Of course, in healthcare settings, nurses, CNAs, LPNs, and others, there's a lot of, in my own view, very healthy discussion that's occurred involving the unions that represent them. They vary, of course, in different parts of the country and different occupational groups with their employers. There's healthy discussion occurring in our public schools, the key unions, of course, being the AFT and the NEA, being involved in discussions about under what conditions teachers would work, how would they take on online instruction, how do they take on mixed mode instruction. I know all about that. I'm teaching online this semester, and I've been right in the middle of experiencing it, although I don't have to experience it with younger children. I get to experience it with 18-year-olds and older. And then I'd also remind you just another, interesting example of our field. We don't often recognize this, but I think it's really important. Professional sports, right? The major sports are all organized in the United States with unions negotiating with the leagues. And what's been happening? They've been engaged in active negotiation and discussion over under what conditions would the players return? Would they return under the kind of bubble that the NBA has created, or the kind of non-bubble, quasi-protected conditions that have prevailed in the NFL and for the National Hockey League? Again, employees relying on a collective action, a collective body to try and address the health and safety issues that are being raised by the pandemic. The last thing I would just want to leave you with is just my own forecast, my own sense that although these issues I think will lessen when hopefully the pandemic, at least this pandemic, ends, hopefully sooner rather than later, the issues aren't really going to be fully put to bed. Even with this pandemic, even when a vaccine arrives, there's going to be all sorts of continuing negotiation and question about the health and safety within the workplace. Again, I always like to say when I talk to groups of managers, remember what's important is not what they think about health and safety, it's what the employees feel. Do the employees feel they're working in an environment that's safe, not only for them, but for the exposure they're going to provide to their family when they bring whatever it is they've experienced at work home. And it's just my sense, not just because I think the effects of COVID-19 may last as we bring people back, as we've already seen successive rounds of different viruses. And we've also sort of, I think, elevated the concerns, whether there are more viruses or not, concerns about health and safety within the workplace. Health and safety is a really complex set of issues. And let me also remind you again, it's a set of issues where there's the possibility of lots of problem solving. We use the term integrative bargaining in our discussion of negotiation. It has lots of possibility for healthy problem solving and integrative bargaining. At the same time, health and safety issues obviously can become extremely contentious if they're not resolved to the satisfaction of the workforce. And my own forecast is we're going to see an elevation of concern over workplace health and safety, even when COVID-19 is put to bed. So let me stop at that. And again, thank you for this opportunity to interact with you all. I'm really so pleased. There now is a Northern California LERA chapter I can go visit when I go to California to visit my friends and relatives. Take care. I'll stay on, though, if there's questions, and I obviously also want to stay on to participate further in this event.
Sure. Thank you so much, Professor Katz. Those comments were really insightful, discussing how the union and non-union organizations are discussing and addressing all of the COVID-related concerns, and how I think it was really important how you focused on, it's not so much what the employers are doing, but it's how the employees feel, right? You can say you're doing all these things, but are you doing that in a way that the employees feel comfortable coming back to work and feel safe? I think that was an interesting perspective that you don't hear a lot of people focus on. So thank you for that. Those were very, very insightful comments. Now we will turn the floor over to Renee Mayne, our board treasurer, to make the next introduction.
Thank you, Janine. I have the honor of introducing Dennis Dabney. Dennis is the Senior Vice President at Kaiser Permanente for National Labor Relations and at the Office of the Labor Management Partnership. Mr. Dabney is an attorney, and he has over 35 years of management-side labor relations experience. He leads Kaiser Permanente's labor relations work with 165,000 unionized employees. And Mr. Dabney oversees over 50 labor agreements, and he also oversees the longest labor management partnership in the nation. Mr. Dabney is the immediate past president of LERA, and he is a recipient of LERA's prestigious Lifetime Award. Mr. Dabney will also discuss the intersection between COVID and LERA. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Dabney.
Thank you very much, Renee, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to start out with, of course, a commercial, Who's Kaiser? I want to talk a little bit about why I've been involved with LERA for so long, starting at a local level and then moving into national LERA. Then I want to talk a little bit about our labor management partnership, just so people get the basics of what it is and how we operate it. And I will end with a discussion around COVID. I was asked to make some remarks concerning how we're doing in this new COVID environment. Now, somewhere out there, there is someone with some slides, maybe. And if it is, we'll go through those very quickly. If it isn't, then I'll just make do, because my technology hasn't really been working today. I am actually looking at the device that I'm supposed to be reading from, and the device I'm supposed to be reading from is up there, but I'll make do. And so first of all, you know who I am. I think Renee gave a great introduction of that, so I'm going to kind of skip over that part. I'm going to go to more of who is Kaiser Permanente, and again, this is my TV commercial. So Kaiser Permanente is a health plan hospital system. We have about 12.4 million members in 8 states and Washington, D.C., about 218,000 employees, 23,000 physicians, 715 medical offices, 39 hospitals, and we're about 85 billion in annual revenue. So that's my TV commercial. And then I moved from that to talk about LERA and how I got involved in LERA. And it was a long time ago. I think it was, the slide says 2002. I think it was before that. I was invited to a local LERA chapter meeting in Detroit by a union official, believe it or not. And when I got into that meeting, I found that the union official, he knew the people from FMCS, he knew the local arbitrators, he knew various professors that taught at Wayne State University and Michigan State University that were participants in the LERA local chapter. So again, that prompted me as a management lead to get more involved in LERA at a local level, because again, these are the people in the profession that we're in. These are the people that we deal with on a daily basis. I wondered why when we went into arbitration meetings, the union official would, "Hey, Jim, how are you?" And it's, well, how does he know everybody? Or when we get into negotiations and someone shows up from the FMCS and the union official knows them on a first name basis, and I wouldn't. And so that kind of got me involved locally. And then as I started participating in the national functions, you know, I found that the annual meeting, there's excellent workshops around pertinent subjects that we're concerned about in labor and employee relations, especially labor relations. I found that I met people like Harry Katz, who I could talk to about labor relations issues and employment issues. So there are great professors there. I met basically everyone from FMCS, and I was able to talk to them, gain knowledge from discussions with those people. Again, there's arbitrators and mediators that I met nationally. I had the opportunity to participate in workshops that I provided along with union officials that I work with. And I've also had the opportunity of attending great seminars that were provided by others. So That's LERA. That's why I'm involved. That's why I stay involved. And once you get involved in LERA, you find out that you can't just sit on the bench. So even locally, we got an invitation today. There's an open position in the local LERA chapter. So I encourage people to step up, volunteer, get involved locally, and do the same nationally. So that's my LERA commercial. And then I'll move into a little bit more about our labor management partnership. And a lot of people wonder why Kaiser Permanente is so, I'm going to say, involved with labor. And I would say the next slide kind of shows why that is. It's a picture right in the middle. The bald guy with the glasses is Henry Kaiser. And he formed Kaiser Permanente, helped plan hospital. He was in construction, he built dams. And those people around him are unionized workers. And so we have been unionized from the beginning. Kaiser Permanente Health Plan started out by providing health insurance to unionized workers. We have grown from there to this large organization where we have a partnership with about we have 162,000 represented employees. More than half of them are represented by what we call partnership unions. So the Coalition of Kaiser Permanente unions and the Alliance of Healthcare Unions are both what we call partnership unions. And that partnership, again, has been around for 20 plus years now. 80% of our employees, again, are in these partnership unions. And we have non-partner unions, but yet we still operate, I say, in partnership with them. And that might not be official, but I think it's a partnership. So we also have 2 separate national agreements with our partner unions that we negotiate every 3 or 4 years. On the next slide, we talk a little bit about the strategy. Most people assume that this partnership is a labor relations strategy, and it's not. It's really an operational strategy. And so unit-based teams is the core of our labor management partnership. Those are people that are out there on the front line every day doing the things that we need to do to make things better for our members. And I will say, when I first started at Kaiser Permanente, I was just the labor relations person. So all I was dealing with was labor issues. And then I inherited the Office of Labor Management Partnership. And that's when I got the opportunity to go out in the field and see what our employees were doing and see the value of partnership. And when you see employees sitting around explaining to you how they saved $1 million or $500,000 or $50,000, I found it's not really the money they saved or the project that they're talking about. It's the enthusiasm that they have in what they're doing and the services that they're delivering. When you look at some of our unit-based teams and the things that they do for our patients, for example, we had a NICU unit where, you got these babies that are very, very young and vulnerable in incubators, and parents want to be with their kids. They want to be there the entire time, but of course they can't be. But working with those patients, our frontline employees decided to mount cameras in those incubators and give parents links to them where they could see their kids 24/7 if they wanted to give them some comfort that they were being taken care of, that they can see them whenever they wanted to see them. And those are the kinds of things that our unit-based teams do. And again, that's why we say it's a operational strategy, not labor relations strategy. Then on the next page, these are all the unions that we have that are involved in partnership. Again, we have the Alliance on the left, my left. We have the SEIU and OPIU and IFPTE on the right. And then UFCW has local unions in both union associations. So they're also depicted on this slide. On the next slide, we've had 7 national agreements since 2000. When I initially started at Kaiser Permanente, I was accustomed to bargaining with, at the most, maybe 20 people on each side. And I get to Kaiser Permanente and they tell me there's going to be about 400 people in the room. And I'm trying to understand, how are you going to negotiate a contract with 400 people in the room? And this is just a picture of one of those general sessions that we have. But it's done, it's successful. We always do something innovative in every single contract that we negotiate. It's facilitated, it's interest-based, and it works for Kaiser Permanente. So that's what I'll say about that. And then on the next slide, these are some of the projects that our teams are working on. So it's not creature comforts. They're working on things that provide better quality, affordability throughout our organization. And we have about 3,500 unit-based teams that are focused on these kinds of various projects. On the next slide, we talk about so you just heard what management gained is really what I just explained. We gained the improvements in quality and service, attendance, employee satisfaction, member and patient satisfaction. What do unions gain from this partnership? Industrial leading wages and benefits. We have income security agreements for our employees. They have a voice on the front line. And we also have a card check neutrality. And our unions have grown tremendously over the last 20 years, as you can see here, from 57,000 to 128,000 through partnership. So Kaiser Permanente has grown, the unions have grown as well, and our employees have benefited. So, it's an equation that works for all of us. On the next slide. So, COVID came along in about March, and it was, how do you operate in a COVID environment, and what's all the stuff? And you may remember early on, there was a lot of conversation about the risk of exposure for employees. There were all kinds of shortages of PPE. There was a possibility of all of our facilities being overwhelmed with patients. We're looking at the things that were going on in New York, and hospitals were being flooded. We had half of our employees working from home. So there were a number of different things that we were facing at that time. And it's a large organization, and how do you put your arms around it, start making some traction and moving forward? And I think the best thing that we decided to do, as painful as it was, is to meet. We started out twice a week with every union in Kaiser Permanente. And so I think there were probably about 120 people on those phone calls that we initially started, where we would talk about these things. We would talk about exposure, we would talk about PPE, we would talk about how we thought we needed to roll things out. It gave us an opportunity and a platform to talk to all the labor at the same time. And then we would also break off into smaller groups to get into specifics and details around those topics. And then some of the other things that we did are on the next slide, where we did some things and provided additional benefits to our employees because of some of the fears that you just saw on that last slide. So we provided up to 80 hours of additional paid leave time for those who tested positive for COVID. We provided childcare grants of up to $300 per week for our employees, since their kids are out of school and they needed to be at work. How do you manage your kids? And we also provided some short-term housing and near our medical facilities, and assisted employees with situations that they had. And we basically had a 1-800 number that they could call, and we could help them work through some of those situations so that they could be at work. And then on the last slide, I conclude by saying that's how we faced COVID. We still meet, now it's weekly with our unions, and we're still working through issues. There's still tons of things that we need to work through. And so I'm going to conclude with that and turn it back to you, Renee. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dabney. That was very, very insightful. And as a Kaiser member, like, I love Kaiser. I just have to say that, not to put a plug in it, but like, that's a personal experience. So thank you very much. It's really great to hear all that you've done for your employees and your doctors and providing the extra childcare and the grants. That is really remarkable. And hopefully that sets a precedent for other employers as they try to figure out how to make their employees happy as we all try to get through this. So that is wonderful. Now I will turn the floor over to our executive board member, Jim Pruitt, for our next introduction.
Thank you, and thanks everybody. Arbitrator Renee Mayne said that it was an honor to introduce Mr. Dabney. Knowing Mr. Dabney as I do, he won't mind me saying that I have a greater honor at this moment. I want to start with an emotional punch. A number of years ago, before Dennis Dabney or Professor Katz were in leadership of LERA, the executive director of LERA retired, and the leadership of LERA at the time decided not to promote the assistant executive director to the director position. That young woman's name was Emily Smith. Anyone on the Northern California board, on hearing that, realizes what a stupefying decision that was. Ill-advised and baffling. Some years, fortunately, some couple of years later, leaders like Professor Katz and Mr. Dabney rectified that decision and promoted Emily Smith to the executive director of LERA. Anyone who's worked with her knows these things. She's a skilled administrator, a skilled labor relations professional, a mother, a calmer of disputatious meetings that occasionally occur in her purview. Emily, you're a good friend to so many of us. Welcome to Northern California virtually, and we hope to see you here in person sometime soon. Emily Smith, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was really sweet. I really appreciate that introduction. And thank you so much to all of you for letting me be here with you today. I would love to officially welcome back NorCal LERA. This relaunch is the result of efforts of a talented and committed group of people that I am so proud to be associated with. And it could not come at a more needed time. In a period marked by polarization and divisiveness, LERA serves such an important function on the road to wellness for our nation. Our role has always been to bring people together, to listen to each other, learn from each other, and to find the best way forward. And we invite all of you attending today to become a member of NorCal LERA and to get more deeply involved in those efforts. As a chapter member of NorCal LERA, you will receive affiliate benefits from the national organization as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. It's so easy to become a member of NorCal LERA. To do that and to learn more about the chapter and stay apprised of future events, you can visit the NorCal LERA website, which is lerachapter.org/NorCal-LERA. And as a member, you will have access to the member-only directory and other restricted content. You will also receive affiliate benefits from National LERA, which is a really, really good thing. And these include our monthly, or actually it's bi-monthly e-bulletin newsletters that keep the entire field connected. We'll send you our quarterly labor and employment law newsletters so that you know about the issues that really matter. And you'll have access to all of our electronic library of LERA publications. And this is a searchable, full-text resource that contains current and all past issues. So it's a ton of content and it's at your fingertips at all times. And speaking of our publications, LERA does have several publications that we release each year. Our research volume is a deep dive into one topic. And this year's volume focused on reimagining the governance of work and employment. Currently, we're poised to release the latest edition of our Perspectives on Work magazine that Bernadette Tiemann, that you got introduced to earlier, and our editorial team have been feverishly working on. You'll see a picture there in the slide. The magazine covers a wide array of current LER issues from all sides, and I know I may be biased, but I do believe that this year is the best issue we have ever put together. 2020 happens to mark the 100th anniversary of the field of industrial relations in our country. So this anniversary date is hotly contested amongst our academics. And there are several pieces in the magazine that recap our history as a nation and as an organization. It also focuses on the future of worker organization from here on out. So we are very excited to see it hit the shelves, and it should be in your mailbox as well before Thanksgiving. We also conduct several large-scale meetings each year, and you are certainly invited to participate at those events. And those are moved from location to a location around the country. Although we did conduct our first ever all virtual annual meeting this June, and that was an interesting and fantastic experience, actually, and opened all kinds of doors that we hoped we will definitely continue something along that vein. And before I turn over the mic, I'd love to encourage you to not only join NorCal LERA, but also to take an active role, as others have encouraged you to do. You can email any of the NorCal LERA officers about volunteer opportunities, and you will definitely get so much more out of your experience. Thank you for attending today, and I hope we will see you at many future events. Feel free to contact myself or Bernadette Tiemann if you have any questions about how to get more involved at the national level, and we can certainly point you in the right direction. And thank you so much for your time, and the entire organization is looking forward to NorCal LERA's future contributions to the field.
Thank you so much, Emily. I certainly want to thank you on a personal level for all you have done just for our chapter locally and helping us get to where we are, and also on a national level, because I know you are instrumental in everything that the National Labor and Employment Relations Association does. So thank you very much for all you have done, the behind the scenes work, and all you do to make this organization thrive and do so very well. Looks like we have a little bit of time here. I would like to open the floor for our participants to raise some questions for the speakers that we've just had. We will have the Assemblywoman speaking at 1 o'clock, but that gives us a little bit of cushion time here. So I certainly want people to be able to ask any questions. Feel free, you can put your questions through the chat, or you can take the stage and we'll focus on your screen if anyone has any questions of the speakers.
So I have a question for Professor Katz, and this relates to the trend that people are seeing where some employees may not be returning to the office even after COVID passes, and the telework becomes more of a feature for the place of employment, and how he sees that impacting labor relations, both from the union side is trying to organize workers who are no longer at some centrally located place, and of course for employers and the challenges and the types of issues that will come up in collective bargaining around telework.
Well, that's a great question. You know, honestly, I don't have a full set of answers. I think your question kind of answers itself as you did at the end. This is going to be a big set of issues that we're all going to have to wrestle with. You know, obviously the challenges for the labor movement, just as you suggested, is unions generally have been formed in large workplaces where there's the opportunity for lots of, you know, peer-to-peer interaction or organizing and solidarity bonds to be formed. And we know from history when workers are scattered, not only when they work at home, even if they work in smaller workplaces, they're very hard to organize, and they're certainly hard to organize, as you said, if they're not coming into the office at all and they're alone. That's the challenge. The opportunity is that there's all these health and safety issues that aren't necessarily going to be fully addressed by employer action alone. I know lots of unions are talking about the idea of activating, you know, organizing efforts, even in the face of the fact that you mentioned that not everybody's coming back to the home base, because people are upset or at least worried and insecure about what life is going to be like. On the HR side, obviously, there's all sorts of concerns you alluded to. How do you manage people who are working at home, when you don't have direct observation of their performance. There's people in the ILR school who spent their careers. Brad Bell, by the way, is one of our key HR faculty member who's an expert on virtual teams. Brad's in incredible demand right now because we've had an explosion in the use of virtual teams, and it creates all sorts of questions about HR management, let alone the labor and employment issues about how do you deal with not only conformance with the Fair Labor Standards Act and other matters. All sorts of issues are going to surface. So I think what I really just finished with is you're exactly right. This is a big set of issues. We could have an endless number of LERA sessions at the local and national level in the future about how are we actually responding and adjusting to the fact that not everybody is coming back to the home base. To be honest, I'll give you my own personal experience. I have two roles. I teach as a faculty member. I've been teaching online. My undergraduate class is 140 students, some of whom are in Ithaca, many of whom didn't come back to campus. Some are connecting in from China, Japan, other parts of Asia, all over the United States and other parts of the world. I have found with Zoom technology, it's going remarkably well. And I'm thinking of ways to actually, use that technology subsequently in my own teaching. I also manage an institute, and it's based in New York City. We provide professional development training on all sorts of topics through ILR Outreach and eCornell. And I'm facing the exact question you have. Those employees are all working at home. How do we not only manage them, but how do we maintain an esprit de corps? How do we maintain a feeling of collaboration and cohesive? I, as a manager, have been just holding many more team meetings just to have us talk to one another, even when we don't have a work problem, just to check in and see how we're all doing, because we face the very issue you're mentioning is that, we don't see each other like we did. And I worry that we kind of don't have the same bond. It's a great question.
And another question we have from Paul Starkey. The question is for any panel member. Are parties resolving disputes through traditional mechanisms, grievance, arbitration, joint committees, or is there an innovation in dispute resolution that you or any of you are seeing?
Well, I'm happy to comment again, but I'll let, I don't know, Dennis's experiences inside Kaiser Permanente. The ILR school, we've trained a lot of arbitrators and mediators, and we stay in touch with them, especially through the Institute. I direct the Scheinman Institute on Conflict Resolution. The preliminary response we're getting is somewhat parallel to what I've experienced teaching. Is many people are surprised about how well they can continue work after overcoming the few hurdles of learning how to do a Zoom meeting and how to hold breakout rooms and caucuses and even how to engage as a mediator in negotiations or settlement discussions. And one after another, I've been hearing from parties saying they're surprised that it's going pretty well. And in some cases, it's even better. I've heard some mediators tell me they can communicate more directly. They can bring in, key people, executives who weren't available if they had to do the meeting in person, but now they can Zoom in and, provide input into a mediation or and all. They can engage them. So it's another interesting question. We're going to see more and more study of as you all are going to be more and more involved, because even when we can return to the office, given that people now have been exposed to Zoom and other technologies, I think there's going to be more use of it. Not necessarily as much as we're having to use now, but more use of virtual technology in everything we do. And I think it's going to become a part of dispute resolution.
Thank you for that.
Find my mute button, sorry, but I finally found it. I thought it was interesting when COVID started, we kind of canceled, arbitrations and disputes, and everybody was, okay, we're not talking. And then we slowly moved back into not only negotiating via Zoom, having arbitrations via Zoom. We have these panels with labor, with an arbitrator present, where, all the parties hear whatever the issue is. And if the parties can all agree on a solution, they do that. And if they can't, then they send it to the arbitrator who's sitting there for a resolution, and we're doing all that via Zoom. And I'm like you, Harry, it seems like it works better because now everybody can attend the hearing, and it's easier to have witnesses available and everything else. So that's our experience.
Mr. Dabney, I have a question for you. Do you find that parties within Kaiser are settling quicker because somehow the electronic format of being on Zoom or whatever is facilitating more open dialogue, or is there a way that that people seem to be resolving issues quicker through this technology?
I guess, make sure I'm not on mute. I guess in my view, I see the same thing. We still wait until we're at the courthouse steps. So we have a Zoom meeting scheduled for Tuesday. So Friday, we're scrambling to see can we resolve it. And so it's the same thing as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. And I guess another question we have is, what do either of you see the future of unions under COVID? Any additional, maybe immediate versus long-term implications of how this might affect unions as we try to navigate this as a nation?
Dennis, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think I'll go first, but I'll say what you said, Harry, that there's going to be more people working at home, I think, after this, and unions are going to have to somehow get comfortable with not being able to see large groups of people at any one place in time, or come in and visit a workforce where all the workers are sitting at desks. They're going to have to somehow incorporate virtual into their lives. And I would say, we have these things that the union calls delegates conferences, where we would bring 300 or 400, 600 people together for basically a union conference. Our Alliance union just had one, and it was virtual. I think it went very well, but I think that's the new normal for unions. And I think they're going to find that they can get more employees involved through virtual because they don't have to physically travel. And they might take advantage of that in the future.
Yeah, I only had two things. I think that's a great set of observations from Dennis. Two different things. One is it creates the current crisis and the lingering effects of it, and the heightened concern about health and safety creates opportunities for unions. And I know many unions are talking about how they could use that opportunity to enhance their organizing effort. Now, it remains to be seen, if those organizing efforts are successful, but I think there's going to be a heated focus on organizing. Again, it depends on how the presidential election goes in part. We may, if there is a change in administration, you may see a different kind of NLRB set of appointments coming up, making, again, some actions by the board, or easing up on and some of the issues regarding organizing and how the board gets involved, again, also contributing to the union efforts at organizing. The other thing is, as Dennis said, I think there's new forms to use virtual, and I think many of the unions are going to discover that they can communicate more with their members more actively because of the expansion of virtual. They've been somewhat laggard in taking advantage of technology, social media, and other means to communicate with their current members. I'm not talking about organizing. That's another interesting domain too, to talk about how they could use technology to organize. I think they're going to be led into a new form of member activism that's possible because of the ability to communicate to their members continuously with internet technology. I mean, firms do it. They talk much more to their employees through the technology, and I think unions are going to be challenged, but have the opportunity again to catch up, and maybe they'll be kind of forced into it because of everything that's been happening.
Thank you for that. So I think we could probably squeeze one more question in here before the Assemblywoman joins us. The next question is from Jarrell Sorensen. Do we anticipate an expansion of AB 119 in terms of information gathering for unions given the probability of the new work at home environment that may exist in the future?
I'm not so familiar with AB 119, but I guess I'd say, look, the technology is now more available. I myself was surprised what is feasible. Of course, I was inching up and using more technology and having guest speakers occasionally Zoom into my class, but I've really, I've been forced into a whole other leap in the way I teach. And I think unions are going to be forced into a whole other leap in the way they not only, as Dennis said, negotiate, meet as a union, but even communicate with their members. I think the technology obviously is available, it works, and there's many opportunities in how it can be used, some of which we're not going to be able to anticipate. They're still to be discovered and implemented.
Can you remind us what AB 119 is?
So AB 119 is a bill that passed in the same year that Janus was issued. And it had a number of features, but I think the one that Jarrell is referring to is the requirement that public employers, in some cases proactively, send unions the names of the new employees and their contact information, including home addresses, home telephone numbers, home private email, and that kind of thing, to allow unions to be able to reach out to new employees and current employees in a workplace.
Sounds like a Zoom call list to me.
Yeah.
So I am thinking, as everyone knows, on the schedule, we will be hearing from the Assemblywoman, although we might have a few minutes here. How about we take about a 5-minute break and then we all reconvene in about that time, and you'll know when we're back on because I will be talking and my screen will be on. How about that? All right, well, let's go ahead and take a small break here. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks.
Okay, who will introduce our next speaker?
Thank you, and welcome to the Assemblywoman, and we are very grateful that you're willing to speak to the group here today at our inaugural event. And I'd like to introduce Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez. She was elected in May of 2013, promising to fight for our state's working and middle classes, and she hasn't stopped yet. In 2015, the National Atlantic magazine labeled her the California Democrat setting the national agenda for her practical, progressive legislation aimed at alleviating real issues in people's lives. In 2014, Lorena authored historic legislation to allow 6.5 million Californians the ability to earn paid sick leave. When AB 1522 was signed by Governor Brown, California became the first state in the nation to guarantee earned sick days for every single private sector worker, regardless of employer size or sector. Lorena has passed critical bills to protect the jobs of grocery workers, fight the misclassification of employees as independent contractors, create the first workplace bullying training requirement in the nation, limit excessive CEO compensation in the utility industry, protect immigrant communities from legal services frauds, and mandate that public schools test their drinking water for lead. Taking on women's equity pay issues, large and small, Lorena co-authored the nation's toughest rules to close the gender pay gap and wrote the legislation that finally forced California to classify high school cheerleading as a sport. Lorena is the first Latina in California history to chair the Assembly Appropriations Committee. She is also chairwoman of the Select Committee on Women in the Workplace and the chair of the Latino Caucus. Prior to being elected to the Assembly, Lorena was a labor leader and organizer, serving as the first woman and the first person of color to be elected CEO and Secretary Treasurer of the San Diego and Imperial Counties Labor Council, AFL-CIO. Please give Lorena a warm welcome, and we're going to hear a lot about AB 5 and what's happening right now with the proposition that's on the ballot.
Well, thank you. And, I got some kind of basics questions because people always want to hear different things. But there were initial questions about, how we got to where we were on AB 5 and 2257. And so we'll just start there. I think a lot of people, of course, on this call understand the Dynamics decision threw us into a little bit of a territory of unknown. I mean, after the Dynamics decision, there were businesses and labor both coming to the legislature and saying, okay, we get it. This is a decision about wages, but what now? What is our, what are we looking at as far as what tests we're using? The Dynamics decision was pretty clear about the court's feelings about Borrello and about the need to add more clarity. And so there was no reason to believe that this was just going to be on wage orders, that this was going to be applied throughout our labor code, but that it would take years and years to do that in the forum that the courts laid out, basically through the courts. And that's always been our problem with Borrello too. I really do believe the fact that there wasn't a lot of action through the legislature to clear a lot of questions up. And so for workers to be able to assert their rights, they always had to sue. And I think that was brought up in Dynamics that, workers were waiting 10 years for relief. It was far too long. We needed certainty, and we needed the ability to, certainty for both the employer and the employee, and the ability to attack it sooner and easier. So with business wanting clarification and labor wanting clarification, we decided we would take on the issue of AB5. And what we would do is say, okay, we're all pretty clear that Dynamics, the ABC decision that the courts laid out, are going to be applied throughout the labor code. It wouldn't make sense to use Borrello and workers' comp or UI. And so we applied it across the board, and we said, but doing that, what are we missing here? What are the exemptions that need to be made in order to line it up with kind of historical law in California, exceptions that have been debated and brought through the legislature on UI and workers' comp? What do we need to do to line it up with the real, the decisions behind Dynamics? Some of the things that the justices talked about in the decision, what their rationale was. And that's how we started sculpting the, if you will, the exceptions to AB5. When would it not be applicable to apply AB5? And there was a lot of pressure to get something done the first year. So we did as much as we could. We met with hundreds of industries. Now there were some that we knew we were not going to get to in the first year. There was just so many questions. A classic example of that, of course, was the music industry, where we knew that something had to be done. It made no sense for the music industry, but at the same time, trying to come up with rules around the music industry were exceptionally complex. And at some point, the negotiations between workers' representatives and the industry broke down, and everybody said to us, don't put us in this year. We'll work on it. And we did. We ended up coming back and getting that into 2257. But with AB5, there would be people who came to us, and it was really easy. Things that were historically exempt in California law, or that were laid out, and the reasoning for their exemptions from unemployment insurance or workers' compensation made sense here too. People who, yes, they work as independent contractors, but they really do have the right to bargain for themselves. They have leverage to bargain for themselves. They have the right to control their own work, the right to set their own hours sometimes, really are doing the business of a small business. Those were kind of the easy ones, doctors, lawyers, that seemed obvious. But then we started getting into tougher questions, where people definitely wanted exemptions, but they didn't really fit. And so some of those exemptions got made and some didn't. One of the things that we did in our first year was start with the idea of a business-to-business exemption. But we worked really hard to try to craft that in a way that didn't allow for a loophole for a company to come in and just call their contractors small businesses. We'd seen that before, obviously in the janitorial industry, to try to avoid misclassification by simply saying a janitor was an independent contractor because they in fact were their own individual company when it wasn't true. So we were trying to figure out the best way to sculpt a business-to-business exemption without making it so broad that it was just a huge loophole in an ability to use it however people wanted, if you will, to misclassify folks. We got through that first year. There was a lot of craziness going on. A lot of people didn't realize. We're also now finding out that a lot of people, sorry, you can see my son, one of my sons in the background. A lot of people didn't even realize that there were misclassification laws. We deal with this every day. There were a ton of people, especially in the arts, who never even heard of Borrello and didn't realize that there were these tests, regardless of the fact that, hundreds of thousands of them had been audited and found guilty of misclassification through EDD. So it's been tough. It's been tough, and we continue to work on it like we promised we would with 2257. Came back this year, got a music exemption. We worked out some language with freelance writers, which was exceptionally hard. We heard from both sides on the freelance writer side. Workers who felt like that they were put in a position of being permalancers, workers who wanted the right to organize in an organized workplace, but they were being converted to independent contractors, to freelancers, and trying to cut that was difficult. We ended up coming back and making some changes for that in photography to add more flexibility for true freelancers, but still provide protections from allowing businesses to simply replace their employees with full-time freelancers. So we've been kind of moving through the process. 2257 also took on, I think, not only business to business to help clarify that portion, but also the referral agency language. What we have found in reviewing all this, there's some really clear patterns, and it's really tough from a perspective when going through these to be able to really decipher between people who are working as labor brokers and people who are truly referral agencies. So we put a lot of conditions in both the referral agency and the business to business to ensure that those people who are working under those conditions are truly small businesses. They really have control over their work. They really have the ability to go out and work for other people. They can set their own rates. They can have their own customers, things that really set them aside from being just an independent contractor in name only. So that's where we got, despite all of that, with all the exemptions, reading dynamics, and trying to figure out what is appropriate for an exemption and using the analysis of dynamics. The one thing that clearly wasn't was our rideshare drivers. And so we went round and round with app companies talking about this, but Dynamics itself was about delivery drivers. And if you go through any of the tests, the Borello test, the ABC test, the business to business, it's clear that the drivers themselves and delivery drivers and rideshare drivers are under the control and direction of these companies. And of course, the control and direction aspect of misclassification is in every single law out there. It's in the common law, it's in the IRS test, it's in Borello, and of course it's in ABC as well, and so in AB5. So the control and direction that these companies have over these drivers, just there was no rational way to provide them with an exemption that they sought. As a result, of course, they've decided to go to the ballot box with a historic amount of money, close to $200 million now, to say they want to write their own rules. Now, you know, as somebody who's worked for workers my whole life, I think that's exceptionally dangerous, and really is precedential if they win. But we're going to continue to try to work with them and ensure that those drivers are protected, which we don't think that they will be under this ballot initiative. So that's kind of how we got here, what we've done. And I don't know if anybody has any questions. I'm sure plenty, but I'd be happy to take some.
Sure.
I have a quick question. Sorry, I didn't want to jump in. You mentioned that there's been a huge amount of money that's been spent by the primarily Uber and Lyft, I imagine, in promoting Prop 22. Is there something we're not hearing about the effect of their model on I guess the state budget? I mean, these are employees who don't get benefits, unemployment benefits, workers' comp benefits as independent contractors. Is that a cost that taxpayers end up having to deal with?
So pre-pandemic, it was more, there were costs, but it was really hard to quantify. So they were a little bit more hypothetical. We could say, well, look, you underfunded the UI system by some $400 million. And people would kind of say, yeah, well, our workers don't get UI, so that's okay. And by and far, they weren't applying for UI, so that was true. And then the pandemic hit. And then all of a sudden, these rideshare drivers are like, wait a minute, I'm an employee, and they are under California law, and they do have the right to unemployment insurance. And they have had that right for many, many years. And so these companies have skirted paying into unemployment insurance. There's a hole of at least $450 million that if they pass Prop 22, we will never be able to get from them. That means that the loan we had to take from the federal government, which was about the same amount, will have to be paid back in 2 years, and it'll be distributed among law-abiding businesses. As we saw during the recession, their UI rates will actually go up. And so we are paying for that. And then you see other things, right? No workers' compensation and no health care meant that if drivers got in an accident and ended up in a long-term care situation, it was taxpayers funding that, right? It's emergency room care if they didn't have other health care. So there's always kind of that battle as well. We saw a study out of UCLA that said 1 in 5 rideshare drivers in LA was reliant on public aid, like CalWorks or food stamps. So obviously when a company doesn't pay their fair share, taxpayers end up having to backfill that, and we always have. But in the future, this is exceptionally tough because they'll never have to pay back, especially that UI fund that they owe us.
Thank you. We have another question from Jarrell Sorensen. The question is, what is the next step this administration or the government would take if the proposition passes? Can the legislators just pass a new law that erases the language put into the law by the proposition?
Well, the proposition actually requires for any changes a 7/8 vote of the legislature. That's something that most people have never seen. In fact, we can't find another initiative that has that high of a barrier. So it's highly unlikely that the legislature would pass something by 7/8. There's just no way we can imagine that happening. There are a number of things that could happen. I don't like to think about the hypothetical of them winning, but obviously there's a lot that could happen on the federal level, depending on what happens in the presidential election and what happens with the Senate. There's a lot of other options that could happen. Unfortunately, if you think about legislating in the future around them winning this initiative, that the only forms of bills we could pass would be really regulation on the driver themselves. And so in some ways that's tough because we don't feel like it's really fair to put the onus on the driver. But in doing so, I think in the future, in certain ways, you may change the dynamics of the economics of driving, right? I mean, we should have some rules for people who are carrying strangers in their car, making sure people who are carrying you your food. And we always have with taxis, in fact, we have historically with people who drive public transportation, and we just have no rules with Uber and Lyft. That's because they demand on making their own.
Thank you. And so I know we have at least until 1:35, we have some more of your time. So I want to make sure that we give our attendees an opportunity to pose questions to you. So I guess I would open the floor now to anyone who has any questions. I personally know that this has been at the forefront of all things California labor and employment. It has monumental implications for the industry and everything that we do. And I'm sure it crosses all of the kind of the intersects with everyone and their professions who's actually on the here attending and listening to you speak. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise those, and I will certainly relay them to Ms. Gonzalez.
So I have another question.
Okay.
Because we are such a labor-focused organization. You obviously can't organize independent contractors. They're not employees. Do you think that the Proposition 22 model, the trend that they may be setting, would be something that would be attractive and expanded to other industries that currently aren't using this independent contractor idea as not only to save money, but to skirt organizing efforts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the big dangers, right, of Prop 22. And when you think about the right to organize, under current law, independent contractors can't organize. It's a violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. A couple of years ago, I tried to tackle an organizing bill for 1099 workers and trying to really utilize the exemption of involving the state. It was very complex. It would have been the first of its kind. I couldn't get past I think I got it out of the labor committee and that's it. And it freaked out labor and business. That might not in the future, that might be one way to go. But we are going to see, I think, other companies look at this. And that's, I think, one of the scariest things. Now, there could be some backlash as well. But you could imagine a company like Amazon, who has unlimited resources, coming in and trying to write their own labor rules through an initiative process. I'm hopeful that people start to see this and get a little bit nervous, about what's happening. The number one thing we know that voters do respond to is the fact that these companies are trying to exempt themselves out of labor law, and it's clear they're spending a lot of money to do it. Nobody's been able to go anywhere without seeing an ad, and even with labor committing $12 million, it's, I haven't even seen a anti-Prop 22 ad. So I think voters are skeptical of this, and how far it'll go, we don't know. But it really does highlight the issue that we need change at the federal level. And that's one of the issues we saw with AB5 in dealing with things like freelancers whose jobs could really get shipped out of California because we have tough rules, right? We have protective rules. And yet, if you can go just to another state to hire people, if it's work that can be done remotely, that's dangerous, right? We don't want to be in a situation where we're leaving Californians without work, but at the same time, the lack of national rules and clear rules, that I guess that we can say the NLRB has some ideas about independent contractor that would blow everything up. But the type that I think would really make sense are missing. And so I'm a fan and supportive of the PRO Act. I believe that if we have a different administration, hopefully this has risen to a concern that'll be addressed nationally.
Thank you for that. So it looks like we don't have a lot of questions. If that is the case, and no one's going to jump in right now and has a question that they want to ask Ms. Gonzalez, perhaps that they haven't put in the chat, I want to thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I appreciate your attendance. I know that you are busy. I know that you have other engagements. So thank you on behalf of the board for showing up and kind of explaining this to all of us. And like I said, I cannot underscore enough how significant this is for us, and just to have insights directly into someone who actually has contributed to the legislation is very, very invaluable, and it's a great resource. And so for that, I appreciate your contribution and you sharing this with us today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to make sure all your members know, I tend to legislate in this space, right? I actually have a friend who does employer-side employment law, and she said, it's all right, every year I have to rewrite employee manuals because of you, but it's business. And I get it, right? But always open to things that aren't working, always open to ideas, legislative ideas. I think I have a pretty good handle on the law. I actually went to law school and was an environmental attorney, but then my years in labor, I was exposed firsthand, obviously, to labor and employment law. I know it very well, I think, for being a legislator. And so always looking for good ideas, little tweaks, things that, I don't know if I'd ever take on another AB5, to be honest, or farm worker overtime, or some of the things we've done, sick days. But there are things that I know that need to be fixed. And it's not always, I come from a worker's perspective, but fixing things for employers also sometimes fix things for workers. And I understand that. I understand that very well. So please use our office as a resource and come in if you have an idea and you're like, I don't know if this works or how important it is. Let us know. It might be something we've never seen. I don't sit at home and read the labor code, and so sometimes we realize after the fact that things aren't working the way we had assumed that they would work, or they're just little changes, or case law comes along, obviously, and blows up what we thought was an idea of clear legislative intent. So just know we're here, and I love working in this space, and so please bring us any ideas you have too.
So before you sneak away, you made me think of something that came up earlier in a different discussion. Was somebody asked about AB 119 and whether there would be some expansion of that bill, and that was the one that came out in 2018 that required that employers provide the unions with contact information for their employees and other information. And there was a similar question asking about now that people are teleworking and being at home more, and I know the new legislative season hasn't started yet, the session's not quite underway. Do you know of any potential policy changes that might come around next year that are going to focus on telework and on labor's ability to work with employees who are now maybe working from home?
So I don't know. I'm a little worried, especially if we don't have some changes at the national level, about employees' rights to know anything about our unions' rights to know anything about employees. I think some of that is really under attack at the federal level. So I think post-November, we may have some ideas in response to kind of where we are. As far as telework, I know that there were some ideas that were shot down right away, and it's scary. There was a bill that came in last minute. I don't know, and it was supposed to be a compromise. It was a PAGA bill to basically take away, reform PAGA for stay-at-home folks who may have had a claim. I think, God, it was last minute for missed meal and meal breaks and work breaks, and it actually didn't get a motion in Assembly Labor, which tends to be Assembly Labor by far in the legislature is the most pro-worker committee you have. I mean, you basically can't sit. You will not continue to sit on Assembly Labor if you don't have a perspective of being really pro-labor, pro-worker. So nobody would even touch it. And I think that it was just too last minute, and I understood why we were trying to alleviate some of the concerns about work at home. When the pandemic started, I made the mistake, you can imagine me of all people, made the mistake of saying, hey, we should look at workers' comp, right? Like if you're at home and I pull down the box of my printer paper because I have it in a bad spot and it falls on my head, and as soon as I was like, we've got to, maybe we can incentivize work at home by changing up some of our worker comp rules. And oh my gosh, people are like, oh, let me tell you. And then I was like, okay, I don't need to hear every case where it really was the employer's fault that somebody pulled printer paper on their head. So, it was too quick, but I do think that along with the challenges of working at home, that a lot of people are seeing the benefits of working at home, right? It's good for the environment. It's good for childcare purposes. There's a lot to like about it, but if we're going to do that, we have to change some of the rules, and they can't be all in favor of the employer, right? And we do still have to allow workers the opportunity to organize, even if they are working at home. Remote organizing, I think, is one of the things that we're going to be looking at in the future, period. The idea of a workplace has changed so much, right? It's not a lunchroom that you go in and start talking to your coworkers about. There's so much I've learned from Prop 22 and the rideshare drivers, actually, who organize via app. It's kind of exciting, right? It's innovation within the organizing sphere as well. And I think we're going to see more of that and less traditional organizing. And but for me, if we can do things to encourage basic rules, organizing rights, obviously worker rights, and not going too far, but also say, how do we incentivize allowing people who want to work at home to work at home? So that's a long way of saying, got any ideas, send them to me, but it's going to be tough, right? It's a balance. It's a new balance. It's kind of a new perspective, and it's easy to step in the shit. No other way to say that. Like, I mean, for someone like me, I was like, okay. Like, let's figure this out. But I get it, in repetitive use injuries, that doesn't change at home, right? So we can't unlock everything. And so there's going to have to be a way, though. Work's changing. That's for sure. Work's changing.
Absolutely. I have to ask a follow-up question. So I do a lot of work involving PAGA, and you had mentioned that there was a PAGA bill that came in and it was kind of too late, and so no one wanted to touch it, and it didn't get past the first step. Does that mean that there's like kind of this reluctance to do anything new with PAGA, or how's that working out?
Well, I think one of the problems with taking on PAGA is because, and since I've been there in the last 7 years, it's been interesting. And I have to say, sometimes it's unfair to legislators, right? Especially who aren't attorneys, but who have never dealt with labor law at all, because they're told by business groups, hey, this doesn't work for us. This is going to be litigious. This is going to be, and so they come in. And so when I was first in the legislature, the thing that they kept coming out was the private right of action. Okay. All right, I get that, right? So I used to laugh. I mean, I shouldn't say this now, but I'll tell the story. So when I was doing sick days, I actually got the I got some moderates to come along on that bill. It's because suddenly they just said, we just need to get rid of the private right of action. And I was like, for 3 days of sick leave? Yeah, okay, that's all right. I was like, we have PAGA. I didn't say that. I just said, okay, so I got rid of the private right of action. I felt a little like, and I had a number of legislators who asked me to get rid of it, asked me what it meant. And so, but they were focused on that. That was a lot of the business requests early on. Well, then they went to the PAGA request, like, well, this is applicable under PAGA. I think that there is room under PAGA. There, like, unless we're going to fully fund the department, the labor commissioner's office, and unless we're going to, the Department of Fair Housing, Employment and Housing, which I have issues with, but the labor commissioner's office, it's always gonna, we're gonna need some sort of relief that's available for the worker, right? We just have to. So what are the things in PAGA that I do see as a pathway? The right to cure. Like, let's have an honest conversation about notice and the right to cure, right? But it can't be so simplistic that it's like, oh, on this case, all employers get the right to cure, because a lot of employers will just kind of keep pushing the ball down on this one, and just cure once they get caught, right? So then does that add up? Do you only get so many chances on the right to cure in a workplace? But I think the right to cure aspect is important, especially for small businesses. I would like to see us take that section and allow people more opportunity to cure their wrongs rather than put them in a bad position. The other thing is the settlement aspect. The idea of PAGA is that the state's going to get paid and we're going to fund something out of this if a private attorney is doing this action for us, right? Well, we all know that a lot of these are now just settled with the state getting very little, if anything, out of it. So what would it do for incentives if a certain amount had to actually go back to the state, right? What would that do to incentivize just doing things that would settle because the risk is lower, right? So I think there's room. I think it's gonna have to take stakeholders coming together and really going through all of this and being honest with each other and not trying to like game the system, make anyone feel like they're gaming the system, right? An honest stakeholder group where we're like, what could we do to improve this? Not get rid of it, but what could we do to improve this and make it work the way we imagine it works? I'm interested in it though.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe I'll write to your office or I'll send my comments your way.
Or call us and come in and meet with me. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Ms. Gonzalez. We appreciate your time, appreciate everything, and for the questions that you've answered. So thank you on behalf of the board and NorCal LERA. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so now I will transition. We're going to transition to our NorCal LERA board secretary for a presentation that is going to be about peacekeeping and trust building. And so without further ado, I will turn the presentation over to our current treasurer, Renee Mayne.
Thank you very much, Janine. The session that I'm going to present is about peacekeeping and building trust. And this was the vision of our president, June Paello, who can't be here today. But I had several discussions with him about what he wanted to present at our inaugural event. And so, June, this is for you. Okay, so we are going to do a couple of things here. The first is we're going to define peacekeeping, define building trust, and we are going to have an exercise that you will learn about what trust means to you. And so with that, we're ready for the first slide. Thank you. And if you could put it on full screen, that would work as well. Put it on slideshow. Thank you. Okay, so peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building have a lot of similarities and also differences. Peacekeeping is the effort to maintain a truce. Peacemaking are actions that build peace, and peace building are activities that are seeking to resolve injustices and transform aggression to a peaceful equilibrium. June was particularly interested in peacekeeping because as a mediator, that is often the first role of a mediator is to attempt to halt the actions that would not allow for peacemaking and eventually peace building. Thank you. Next slide. So examples of peacekeeping are grievance and complaint procedures, contract negotiations, labor management committees, community dialogue to reduce violence, and nations ceasefires before they have a peace agreement. Quite often, we see the end game of each of these as being the only success, but often these actions are success unto themselves. And so they are extremely important to the parties, the communities, and the nations that are involved. Next slide. Thank you. Kurt Lewin is one of my favorite theorists when it comes to conflict resolution, because what he found in his work is that you affect your environment and you are affected by your environment. And what I have found with this, using this theory, is I say it's very important to get the right people in the room. Because I'm sure many of you have had the experience where you're able to move forward because you have people who want to work together. But if you have one individual who may be toxic in their approach or about the issue, that person can hold up an entire group. And so this is an important part of considering when you are engaging in peacekeeping in the workplace, in whatever role that you would have, is to consider who's going to be involved and is there a way of improving the possibility of those individuals being committed to finding those outcomes while engaging in peacekeeping. Next slide, please. Thank you. Morton Deutsch is my favorite in terms of his work. He did his PhD work under Kurt Lewin, and Morton Deutsch's theory of competition and cooperation led to William Ury and the others involved in getting to yes, Roger Fisher, Bruce Patton, to establish the concept of interest-based negotiations. And essentially what Morton Deutsch found in his research was that cooperative negotiations, as we know today as being interest-based negotiations, will result in mutual gains, meaning that we want both sides to get what is, if not the issue, what is the interest behind the issue as most important, and that competitive actions will lead to win-lose outcomes. I myself was a chief labor negotiator for 30 years, 9 years on the union side and 21 years on the management side. And Getting to Yes came out just before I began my work with labor unions. And it was transformative for me because I knew that I was naturally a collaborative problem solver, but that provided me the tools to be able to use in my new work as a labor negotiator. Next slide, please. And finally, those who have been engaged in organizational development or transformational work in organizations, Kurt and Lewin's change theory requires that to transform a group dynamic, we need to first agree to halt the current actions. Then we can plan for and implement more desirable actions. And then using that implementation process, the parties can move forward together in changing the group dynamics. Next slide, thank you. Now we're going to shift to building trust. And this is an area that I've spent a lot of time on in my career. Working in labor relations, trust is absolutely necessary, and yet it's often elusive. And what I have found is that trust is not universally defined. So we're going to do an exercise, and I ask you the question. When you think of trust, what is the first word that comes to mind? Not a sentence, but the word. And I suggest you write that word down, and you may also share it in the Zoom chat if you wish. Okay. So we have one that said share, another said loyal, another said earned, honest, open, respect, history, a shared history. That's a very special one, sure. Reliance, being reliable. For me, I'll put mine in the chat. It's honesty. So there are all different ways that we trust people, and sometimes we will automatically feel a trust with someone. And really what's happening, like you may have heard of love languages, well, there's also trust languages. And that means that when we meet somebody and we just automatically feel a connection, a trust connection that is deeply held, it means that that person is speaking our trust language. And then there are times when we could know someone for a very long time and they are not somebody that we quite feel comfortable as a person that we could trust. And usually it means that the person is unintentionally violating our trust language. So what does that mean for labor management relations? It means that it's helpful to know. We'll go to the next slide. It means that it's very helpful to know what your own trust word is, and it's very helpful to know what the other party's trust word is. So if we want to build or repair trust, it may be necessary to share our own definition of trust and learn theirs. It was not uncommon for me when I was having a pre-negotiation meeting with the other chief negotiator to share my trust language and say, for me, trust is about honesty. There's a lot of other things that you could do that, I might not find to be conducive for our talks, but trust is, for me, is about honesty. And then I would ask the person, would you be willing to share with me what trust means with you? And so it's a practice that I use in relationships that are important to me. and it's very helpful when we can be cognizant of what another person's trust requires, so that if we can form that basis of trust, we could move on to solving big problems together. Next slide, please. Well, I want to thank you so very much for your attendance at this event, and I'll turn this over to Janine. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you particularly for presenting on that topic, as you outlined at the outset of that, that topic and its theme, and peacekeeping and peace building is very important, is equally as important today as it's ever been. So thank you for that. And I know, you know, June, that was part of his vision for this event when we started planning months and months ago. So thank you. And I'm sure that June will appreciate that as well. And so as we near the end of our program, Renee, I would like you to briefly touch on the vision as you see it for this chapter moving forward. I think this will be valuable to anyone who's attending today who has interest in joining the chapter or in being a board member or just being a member. I'd like Renee to just give us a brief vision and outlook as to where we plan to go with our chapter.
Thank you very much, Janine. Northern California is the most unionized region in our nation. Our rich history that led to California becoming the 5th largest economy in the world began with the work of women and men who came here for a better life and built our great state. We deserve to have a strong labor and employment relations association. I first joined LERA in 1987 in New York City when it was the Industrial Relations Research Association. At that time, I worked for a labor union that had sent me to intern with the United Farm Workers Union on the Great Boycott. I learned from Cesar Chavez and his family that when you want to make change, when you have a dream, you only need one person who shares that goal. For me, when I was trying to figure out how to reactivate Northern California LERA, Janine Braxton, our MC, our acting president, and our board secretary, contacted me. And she became my one person that shared this commitment. Today, you each have contributed to the mission of LERA to advance workplace relations in the workplace, in research, teaching, and the law. LERA is the only national organization of its kind. We hope to see you again at future NorCal LERA events. Janine, I will now hand the closing to you, our acting president.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you so much. And to Renee's point, yes, Renee and I were able to meet and discuss NorCal LERA, discuss LERA, and here we are today. It's a long way from where we were shortly over a year ago. So thank you to everyone for attending today. Thank you to our board members. You guys have been instrumental and also made invaluable contributions to this event that we've had today. Thank you also to our executive director, Emily Smith, for jumping in and taking the laboring oar to get us here. And I just want to thank everyone for joining today. Again, I want to reiterate, if you or if you know anyone who might be interested in serving as our vice president or serving as a member of our board, please reach out to us. We'll try to put our contact information in the chat session so you can have our website, our LinkedIn page, and our information so you can follow up with us. So thank you very much. We appreciate everyone joining today, and I think that is a wrap. So everyone enjoy the rest of your afternoon and enjoy your weekend, and we look forward to seeing all of you, if not on our board, at our next event. So thank you very much, everyone. Signing off.